Hey everyone. We're very lucky today, and today being May the 6th of 2024, recording a bit in advance. We're very lucky today to have Rabbi Noa Sattah joining us. Rabbi Sattah, of course, needs no introduction. She is the CEO of ACRI, and before that ran Iraq for 11 years. She's led open house and meet and done so many wonderful things with so many of the NIF Mishpacha, and so we're so lucky to have you, Rabbi Sattah. Thank you for being with us on a very busy Monday.
Hi, Michael. Thank you.
Hey. So I wanted to just start off with a feel for how you're doing and how life is over there at the moment. I know we've just caught up before the call started, and so there's certainly a lot going on. Tell us what's going on with you.
Just, in general, life here is pretty intense in terms of just raising children, trying to keep sane with the amount of news that it's constantly changing, and the uncertainty about the war, about the hostages, just about the constant government failure and delivering on any kind of promise to citizens is pretty it's pretty unnerving. And while if we had spoken a year ago, I would have said, Netanyahu can no longer surprise me. I've been surprised several times in the recent months and weeks, and that's that is really astounding. So it's hard to balance the unprecedented and insane events with keeping focus on the important work that we have.
Yeah, it's certainly true that the ability not just of Netanyahu, but well, for me, Israel to surprise us never ceases to amaze. We met in September in your offices and talked about there never being a more dire time for Israel, and then of course September was nothing,
Yes,
absolutely nothing.
Who thought we would be nostalgic about that?
Oh my God. Well, tell us a little bit about how things have changed since then. ACRI has been so busy. Give us an update for those who haven't been quite as closely following. What have you been up to? What have been some of the major victories before the court?
So the past 7 months have been really divided into different periods for us. But of course, human rights organizations become much more important during times of war because of the multiplicity of human rights violations. At the beginning of the war, we focused on issues of prisoners' rights, which continue to be a very important issue today, and freedom of protest. While in the first 6 weeks, 2 months of the war, the court was very unresponsive. We would go to court, we wrote good appeals, we know when our appeals are good, and they were rejected without a hearing, which is very difficult time. Professionally, we're now seeing that there's a lot more openness in the court to hearing our cases, and we were able to really create some changes on the ground. We try and we often get dizzy with the multiplicity of issues, but we try to keep an eye both in what is going on in Israel internally, both in terms of policing and police behavior, in terms of gun distribution, in terms of suppression of freedom of expression, specifically targeting Arab society, but also more broadly. And then things in the West Bank and East Jerusalem that have deteriorated dramatically. And recently, we've also started working on issues inside Gaza. So it's a very vast array of issues.
Yeah, that's a tremendous amount. Let's get specific on some of those. I mean, tell us a little bit about, we're hearing about people being dismissed for liking a Facebook page or a Facebook post. We're hearing about, and of course, ACRI is leading the charge to defend people's rights to freedom of expression. Can you tell us a bit about what that work looks like?
Yes. So unfortunately, this isn't the first cycle of fighting that we've had. So we know that every cycle of fighting brings down more crackdown on freedom of expression. So we've seen before that people were charged or followed for social media posts. But this time, since the war began, the crackdown on benign posting on social media has been unprecedented. and we've seen hundreds of arrests. Of these arrests, there were very few charges, but the chilling effect of having somebody, I have a colleague who is a head of a women's rights organization in Nazareth, and she wrote on Facebook, "The occupation is the root of all terrorism." And she was taken to prison for a night, like a very law-abiding citizen was taken, and the judge dismissed her case, but the feeling of what it's like for hundreds of people to be dragged by the police is, I worry it will have long-term ramifications in the sense of, in Arab society, there is a fear of expressing their opinion. There were suppression, and we'll get to protests in a minute, but there was no ability to protest. And we know that that's a basic human right that we need to protect. And we also know that when society doesn't have the outlets to protest and express themselves, they become radicalized. And so we are very, very concerned about that chilling effect. We see the number of arrests declining. We have been involved in the past few weeks with the case of a professor from Hebrew University, Nadira, who gave an interview with anti-Zionist opinions and then was questioned. She was released. That's the last case that I know of, but we are still in debates with some disciplinary procedures in different universities of Palestinian students and Israeli Jewish students who made comments about the war. So that's still going on. The other part of it is the issues of freedom of protest. In the beginning of the war, all anti-war protests were banned by the police. We managed to get the first permits for, through a Supreme Court hearing, the first permits for demonstration in Tel Aviv, organized by mostly Jewish organizers. And then a few weeks after that, we managed to get the first protest approved for Palestinians in Haifa. So we're gradually seeing that right return, but it's still very, very rocky. And we're also seeing more police violence in the demonstrations that we're trying to respond to.
I mean, it's an amazing win in an incredibly dark moment. You have the really hard task of trying to give people like us hope from the outside. But I think one of the things that is giving us hope is seeing the merging of the hostages' families protest, the Bring Them Home protest, and the anti-Netanyahu protest. We are seeing there's a kind of general merging of those camps. What's the future of the protest movement and the anti-war movement looking like right now?
So I think that if we're looking for an element of hope, I think that the fact that people who are so depressed, so worried, so anxious, live with such uncertainty, they get out of their house every week, risking police brutality, and again they are out in the streets protesting. That's what gives me hope. That's why I go to work, because I say, okay, if these people are finding the strength to go out and protest, we have to be the ones that are giving them a voice and are giving them a platform and are protecting them as much as we can. So I think that it's really a testament to human spirit, the fact that people are outside protesting, saying, we're not going to accept this corrupt government. We're not going to accept this government that abandoned us, that is killing innocent people, that is disappointing us in every way. We are demanding a better future. I think that's a great perspective for hope.
And not to take us away from hope, but are we seeing any impact of that movement on the government?
Not yet. I think that first of all, I want to say that I have been really humbled in the past month in my ability to foresee the upcoming events. So that's very hard for me to tell. But I think that as long as Gantz and Eisenkot are in the government, it is a kind of a confusing message to the protest movement. And I think that once they pull out, that's the demonstrations are getting bigger and bigger every week. We're not back to the September numbers, but they're getting very big, and also are spreading across Israel. And I think that once Gantz and Eisenkot leave the government, that will create a much bigger increase in the demonstrations, and that could have an impact.
Enough of an impact to actually disassemble to destroy the coalition?
Coalitions don't fail over one thing. I think
Yeah.
the fractures are so big and so many issues. So whether it's going to be because of the draft of the Haredi men, or over something that happens in Temple Mount, or over you know, rifts with the international community, it's very hard to tell right now. What we see is that the cracks are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and one of them is going to break it, but I don't know which one.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
the protest movement is very important, both in the sense of giving backing to the forces that will ultimately bring down the government, even though we don't know who they are right now.
Yeah, yeah, and we were so heartened, even at a time where we were despairing in September, seeing that, the judicial coup may go ahead. At least we knew that the vast majority of Israeli civil society was mobilizing against this, and it's, I think, similarly, we don't think that, the protests right now are in a position to topple the government, but we're heartened that Israelis are managing to find the koach to take to the streets nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'll stop making you speculate on the future. Maybe I can ask you a little bit more about some of that important work. So you were talking about protecting the rights of Palestinians, and even a foray into Gaza. What's that looking like for ACRI?
So since the beginning of the war, it's because there's so much public attention, and rightfully so, of course, international attention on what's going on in Gaza. The situation in the West Bank has deteriorated quickly, both in terms of communities that are blockaded. So a village that is completely surrounded, people can't live for work, for school, etc. And in terms of settler violence. We've been to court several times, and it's interesting because in 2023, or at least most of 2023, I would say that I was in a very unfortunate position of protecting a court that I'm mostly frustrated by. And that's mostly because they were very, very reluctant to intervene in issues around Palestinian rights in the West Bank. The hearings that we've had mostly since the ruling on the reasonableness, the courts seemed to find some more strength in terms of cases on the West Bank. They were interested. They didn't dismiss the case. They made claims to the government, and it's kind of a ghosting experience where we say there's a curfew in Hebron, and the military says there's no curfew, but we say, well, every evidence that we have, it's a very frustrating back and forth, but we have been able to win some major victories about removing blockades, about ending curfews, and that has obviously meaning for tens of thousands of people who are able to get to work, get to school, get to their fields. Unfortunately, the issue of settler violence is still very consistent, very worrying. We do see more international attention put to it right now. We are very encouraged by the international pressure and the banning of the different sanctions put on violent settlers, and hopefully that will make an impact. That will start making an impact soon. In terms of Gaza, so ACRI closed our Gaza unit in 2006 because the military pulled out. And now we are reestablishing that, assuming that we will need to be on the ground and intervene at least for the next year. And we, together with Gisha, which is another amazing NIF organization, filed a petition demanding humanitarian aid to northern Gaza. And it's an important step in establishing Israel's responsibility while it's occupying the land to provide a lot of levels of humanitarian assistance. As an occupying force, Israel has a lot of obligations under international law that it is currently not responding to. So the humanitarian aid to northern Gaza was the first appeal. I think we will have others of its kind. And it was a very good hearing. The judges were interested. They asked a lot of questions. They made a lot of demands on the government. The government in the hearing recommitted to reconnecting the water networks, which is so important as summer is beginning here. It's crucial that people have access to water and also sewage. So we are making, I think, on the one hand, it's a frustrating thing that we are making a huge difference, and the situation is still very bad. And what we have to do is we have to keep pressing on the difference until we manage to change the situation.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like drops in the bucket of these huge open wounds. But they're victories, and they're important victories that before.
And they have real impact on the lives of a lot of people.
No, exactly. That's why I'm curious. What's the response like in Israeli society? Are people hearing this? Is this cover? I mean, we hear so much about how Israeli journalism is not covering Gaza. Is there coverage of your victories and of the positive impact they're generating?
There's more coverage of our victories inside Israel. For instance, just before Passover started, we got news on victory of getting the Parent Circle, which is another NIF organization that was banned from schools, getting them back into the school system. So these kinds of issues are covered very widely. The Gaza issue, the West Bank issues are covered mostly by Haaretz, but still, I think that, at least from ACRI's perspective, and maybe it's also a broader NIF perspective, is the sense that even our people, the people who support ACRI, the people who support NIF, have been so weakened by the war that we need to strengthen them first, that we need to reestablish the human rights discourse, the democracy discourse, even within the circles that are very close to us. And that's what we're focusing on. We had a big conference on human rights in times of war because we needed, and we were very worried. It was in January. We were very worried that we took a haul that was too big. And then it turned out to be the coldest day of the year. So it was pouring rain. And of the 350 places, people were standing outside because they couldn't get in. So many people were interested. So we have this community, and we have to give them the power and the tools to re-engage in the issues.
That's really awesome. That's a really positive story, and I'm heartened to hear that as well. We're certainly worried that in times of war, the concern for human rights gets suspended, right? And people are focused on protecting,
and we're kind of used to much shorter wars where you can say, okay, we'll take these 4 weeks and then we'll go back to where we were and try to restore. But I think that this war has gone on for so long that there's no going back. We will never be back on October 6th. We have to rebuild from where we are, where a lot of the concepts and the responsibilities have been really eroded, and we need to reshape the discourse.
Can you talk a little bit about what that might look like? Are we starting to look at what the day after is, or is it just too soon to be there?
I think it is soon, but I think that for many, for a while at ACRI, and I think for many other organizations, the question is how you respond to the discourse, in the sense that certainly at the beginning of the war, for instance, we filed an appeal on prisoners' rights, and people around us were very critical that we were worrying about prisoners. Well, soldiers were sleeping outside, and we said, no, there are not enough mattresses for all of the prisoners. And we had internal discussions and asked ourselves, should we lower the bar? Because if we ask for mattresses now, we just seem ridiculous, right? We have worked so hard as ACRI to establish these minimal requirements for a prisoner, and now they're being eroded. But if we continue to demand that, we look ridiculous. But I think that we have come to a realization that our role is to hold the bar high. It's not to kind of find compromises in the middle, but our role as human rights organizations is to say, this is the obligation, this is what Israel has to meet. We're going to insist on that. And I think that has proven itself as a good position for us.
That's great. Yeah. And I think it's up to us as human rights community leaders to ensure that we're not reverting to the lowest common denominator, right? We can't suspend our morality because of, but I'm sure we're aligned there. I think I just wanted to ask about Al Jazeera. You obviously petitioned the court, previously on this matter, and now since it's developed, are you in a position to talk about what else ACRI might be doing on Al Jazeera?
So we're talking on May 6th, and a lot may happen until this the board convenes. But what happened was in March, the government passed emergency regulations giving the Minister of Defense power to close foreign media outlets. That's an incredibly risky move. And we appealed against the law as it was filed. And so we have a standing appeal. After the decision so the law is obviously drafted neutrally, it doesn't name Al Jazeera. Once the Al Jazeera decision was made, we asked for an injunction and we were not given it. We have a court date on May 15th, where we will be able to make our principal argument against this law. In the meantime, today on May 6th, Al Jazeera gets a hearing in the district court about the decision, which the court may, because the procedure was handled so badly, the court may reject the closing altogether. If they don't reject the closing, then Al Jazeera has the ability to appeal to the Supreme Court. And that may happen next week as well. But we are anticipating a lot of very intense discourse. Our first case as ACRI was about the closing of a newspaper. So we are very focused on protecting that right.
Amazing. Kol hakavod to you. Rabbi, I'd love to just ask before we close, what do you want our community of supporters here in Australia to know? What words of hope can you give them, and what words of action can you invite them to?
Wow. So first of all, I so appreciate everybody on the board for their involvement and their support. And I know that I don't understand how difficult it is from the outside, and with all of the different pressures on maintaining both your commitment to Israel and your commitment to human rights and democracy. I understand that it's really not easy right now. I think that I would call on us to remember that these are transformative times, and it's very hard to tell where they will lead, but we need to be ready to take every opportunity and to respond to any threat. And that's what we're focused on. And I see that that's where all of our NIF community is. So I'm grateful for you to continuing to do that.
Thank you, Rabbi. And we're so grateful for all of your work. So appreciate you taking some time out of your very busy day. Thank you for briefing us, and all the best and all the strength to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.